A courtroom bathed in tense silence. Rows of spectators lean forward, breathless with anticipation. At the center of it all, a poised and determined black woman stands, her gaze unwavering, her hands resting on the edge of the defendant's table. It's not just another trial. It's a battleground of truth and prejudice. The stakes? Her freedom, her dignity, and the fight against a lifetime of systemic injustice. The courtroom feels like a theater of contradictions. On one side is the prosecution, brimming with confidence, convinced of her guilt. On the other side, a woman accused of a crime she didn't commit, carrying the weight of history and the burden of proving her innocence. The judge, a stoic white man, sits high on his bench, his expression unreadable. His reputation precedes him, firm, traditional, and rarely swayed by emotion. To him, this case is just another trial. But for her it is everything. If she fails to prove her innocence today, she will not only lose her freedom but become another statistic in a system riddled with bias and inequality. Who is she? Meet Naomi Carter, a 34-year-old entrepreneur, a mother of two, and a beloved community figure. Known for her charitable work and a thriving bakery business, Naomi's life was the picture of stability, until one fateful night changed everything. Accused of embezzling funds from a community initiative she spearheaded, Naomi found herself thrust into the legal fight of her life. Her world unraveled in an instant. Friends she trusted distanced themselves. Her business faltered under the cloud of suspicion. Even her children faced whispers and stares at school. But despite the weight of it all, Naomi refused to back down. "I am not guilty," she told herself every morning, "and I will prove it." Naomi's resolve stemmed from more than just her innocence. It was about her children, her legacy, and the countless others who looked up to her. She wasn't just fighting for herself. She was challenging a system that often failed people like her. A system that demanded perfection from the innocent while giving the benefit of the doubt to the privileged. The trial began amidst media frenzy. Reporters painted her as a cunning opportunist, weaving a narrative designed to sway public opinion. The prosecutor, armed with circumstantial evidence, argued that Naomi had siphoned off funds for personal gain. The judge seemed distant, detached, almost resigned to the narrative unfolding before him. But Naomi had something they didn't expect: the truth, and a piece of evidence that would shake the foundation of the prosecution's case. What happens when the truth refuses to stay buried? She wondered as she walked into the courtroom each day. Her story wasn't just about her innocence. It was a battle against prejudice, assumptions, and a system designed to see her fail. The audience leaned forward, waiting for the next bombshell. The tension was palpable, the stakes immeasurable. But as Naomi stood tall, her voice unwavering, one thing was clear: she wouldn't go down without a fight. The case would soon take a dramatic turn, revealing the cracks in the prosecution's case. And as the evidence Naomi presented began to unfold, the courtroom and the world would witness a moment that redefined the meaning of justice. The accusation against Naomi Carter didn't just disrupt her life, it dismantled it. Naomi's world spiraled the moment the charges were made public. The community that once rallied behind her charitable work now whispered behind her back. Parents who once greeted her with warm smiles at school drop-offs now avoided her gaze. Her bakery, once a bustling hub of joy and connection, saw a sharp decline in customers. The colorful window displays of cupcakes and cookies began to gather dust as the shadow of the scandal loomed large. Naomi's children, too young to fully grasp the gravity of the situation, came home in tears, recounting cruel taunts from classmates. "Your mom's a thief," they heard repeatedly, the words cutting like knives. Naomi's heart broke, but she masked her pain with resilience, determined not to let her children see her crumble. Naomi's defense lawyer, Richard Mendez, was one of the few who believed in her innocence. But even his faith wavered at times as they faced a mountain of challenges. The prosecution had painted Naomi as a cunning thief, leveraging circumstantial evidence, discrepancies in financial records, unexplained deposits in her bank account, and testimony from a disgruntled former employee. The investigators, eager to close the case quickly, dismissed evidence that pointed elsewhere. A critical alibi witness, a young volunteer who worked closely with Naomi during the time funds allegedly went missing, was ignored entirely. "She's just trying to cover for her," the investigator had said dismissively. Even Richard admitted, "We're not just fighting the evidence. They've weaponized the court of public opinion against you." The courtroom itself seemed to embody the imbalance of power Naomi faced. The prosecutor, Samuel Bryce, was seasoned and unrelenting, known for his aggressive tactics. To him, Naomi wasn't a person. She was another statistic, another case to win. His opening arguments brimmed with confidence as he painted Naomi as a wolf in sheep's clothing, someone who preyed on the goodwill of her community for personal gain. The judge, while professional, initially seemed disinterested in Naomi's plight. His stoic demeanor and lack of probing questions gave the impression of a foregone conclusion. Naomi felt the weight of his gaze, sensing skepticism rather than impartiality. Naomi's struggles were not limited to the courtroom. At every turn, she faced barriers that seemed insurmountable. One of the most damning pieces of evidence was a witness statement from someone Naomi considered a close friend. Samantha, a board member of the charity, testified against Naomi, claiming she'd seen her acting suspiciously with the organization's funds. "I didn't want to believe it," Samantha said on the stand, her voice trembling with false conviction. "But the numbers don't lie." Naomi's heart sank as she listened, betrayal twisting like a knife in her chest. The local press added fuel to the fire, with headlines like "Beloved Businesswoman" or "Deceptive Thief" splashed across front pages. News anchors dissected her case with little regard for nuance, turning her life into a spectacle. "She fits the profile," one commentator said during a broadcast, the implicit bias in his words clear. Naomi began to see firsthand how the justice system was skewed against her. The presumption of innocence, she realized, was a privilege not afforded to everyone. Each time Richard filed a motion to introduce exculpatory evidence, it was met with delays, objections, or outright rejections. "Why is the burden so much heavier for us?" Naomi asked Richard during one of their late-night strategy sessions. "Because they don't see you," he replied solemnly. "They see what they want to believe." Naomi's story wasn't unique. It was emblematic of a deeper issue. In the justice system, where biases often run unchecked, marginalized individuals face an uphill battle to prove their innocence. Studies have shown that people of color are disproportionately targeted, charged, and convicted, often on flimsier evidence than their white counterparts. Naomi's case became a lightning rod for these broader conversations. Activists began to gather outside the courthouse, holding signs that read "Justice for Naomi" and "Innocence until proven guilty." Local leaders spoke out about the systemic inequities that her trial exposed. Inside the courtroom, tensions continued to rise. The prosecution called an accountant to testify, presenting spreadsheets and transaction records that seemed damning at first glance. The prosecutor leaned into his argument. "These numbers don't lie. They tell a story of deception, greed, and betrayal." But Naomi and Richard knew there was another side to the story. Naomi's sleepless nights were spent combing through her own records, determined to find the missing pieces. She began to uncover inconsistencies, documents altered after the fact, timestamps that didn't match her known activities. One night, Naomi stumbled upon a critical piece of evidence, an email chain showing that Samantha had approved a questionable transaction. The timestamp placed it squarely within the period of alleged embezzlement, implicating Samantha as a possible culprit. Naomi's hands trembled as she printed the emails, knowing they could change everything. The court case became a battle of narratives. Confident, relentless, and unwilling to entertain alternative explanations. "This is an open and shut case," Bryce declared during cross-examination, scrambling to introduce Naomi's newfound evidence while battling procedural hurdles. "Your Honor," Richard argued, "the prosecution's case is built on assumptions, not facts." Initially skeptical, but beginning to show flickers of interest as the defense chipped away at the prosecution's narrative. The tension was almost unbearable as the trial approached its midpoint. The audience was left questioning. Could the truth prevail in a system designed to resist it? Naomi Carter had spent weeks feeling like a chess piece in a rigged game, but now, for the first time, she was ready to make her own move. The email implicating Samantha in approving suspicious transactions was the first break she'd had in weeks, but Naomi knew it wasn't enough. She needed more, something undeniable, something that would dismantle the prosecution's case brick by brick. Naomi started by retracing her steps, combing through every record, receipt, and email she could find. Her kitchen table became her war room, stacked with binders, color-coded notes, and a laptop that rarely powered down. One night, as she reviewed transaction records, Naomi noticed something peculiar. A series of withdrawals that occurred at odd hours, times when she was either home with her children or attending community events. She cross-referenced these timestamps with her phone's location history and discovered a match. Her phone had never left her neighborhood during the times the withdrawals were made. "Richard, I think I have something," she said during their next meeting. Richard's eyes lit up as she explained her findings. "If we can prove you weren't even near the location when these transactions occurred, we have a strong argument to introduce reasonable doubt," he replied. With Richard's help, Naomi subpoenaed security footage from the bank where the transactions had taken place. At first, the bank resisted, citing privacy concerns, but Richard's persistence paid off. When the footage finally arrived, Naomi's hands trembled as they played the first clip. The grainy footage showed a figure withdrawing money, but it wasn't Naomi. The woman on the tape wore a hoodie, her face partially obscured, but Naomi recognized the posture and gait immediately. It was Samantha. "I knew it," Naomi whispered, anger and relief mingling in her voice. Determined to solidify her case, Naomi and Richard began digging deeper into Samantha's involvement. They discovered that Samantha had been managing certain financial operations for the charity, a detail conveniently omitted in her testimony. A deeper dive into the charity's financial records revealed irregularities in accounts managed by Samantha, including personal expenses disguised as operational costs. But the most shocking discovery came when Naomi uncovered a hidden file on her work computer. The file contained doctored financial statements, clearly manipulated to make it appear as though Naomi was siphoning funds. Metadata from the file showed it was created and edited by Samantha's login credentials. "That's it," Richard said, almost breathless. "This isn't just evidence, it's a smoking gun." As the trial progressed, Naomi's discoveries began to shift the courtroom's atmosphere. Bryce was visibly caught off guard when the defense introduced the footage and metadata. "This is circumstantial at best," he argued, but the cracks in his confidence were beginning to show. The previously stoic judge began leaning forward during testimonies, asking sharper questions, particularly when Samantha was recalled to the stand. "Ms. Samantha, can you explain why your credentials appear on the altered documents?" he asked, his tone pointed. Samantha stammered, her previously composed demeanor crumbling. The jury members, once skeptical of Naomi, now exchanged glances, their expressions a mix of curiosity and doubt. As Naomi's case gained traction, she found support from unexpected places. One of the charity's former volunteers came forward, offering testimony that corroborated Naomi's timeline and cast further doubt on Samantha's credibility. "Naomi always insisted on transparency," the volunteer testified. "But Samantha? She kept a lot of things to herself." Even members of the community who had distanced themselves began to rally behind her. A local journalist, initially critical of Naomi, published an exposé on the biases in the investigation, highlighting how the prosecution had overlooked critical evidence in their rush to judgment. With the tide turning, the prosecution fought harder to discredit Naomi's evidence. Bryce argued that the footage was inconclusive, that metadata could be manipulated, and that Samantha's involvement didn't absolve Naomi of responsibility. But each argument seemed weaker than the last, eroded by the mounting evidence of Samantha's misconduct. Meanwhile, Naomi remained resolute. "This isn't just about me," she told Richard during a late-night strategy session. "It's about every person who's been accused and convicted because no one bothered to look deeper." As the trial approached its climax, the courtroom buzzed with anticipation. Naomi's evidence had reshaped the narrative, but the ultimate question loomed. Would it be enough to convince the judge and jury? The courtroom was packed, the air thick with anticipation as Naomi Carter's defense prepared to unveil the evidence that could clear her name. Every eye was on her as she sat beside Richard, her attorney, her posture calm but her hands clenched under the table. Today wasn't just about justice for herself. It was about proving that the truth could overcome even the most deeply ingrained biases. Richard began with the security footage. "Your Honor, members of the jury," he said, gesturing to the screen as the first clip began to play. "This footage shows the withdrawals in question being made. As you can see, the person in this video is not my client." The courtroom was silent as the grainy footage played. The figure on the screen, wearing a hoodie, clearly didn't match Naomi's build or demeanor. Richard paused the video. "And this," he added, zooming in on the timestamp, "proves that the transaction took place when my client was at home, a fact corroborated by her phone's location data." There were murmurs from the jury, and even the judge leaned forward to get a better look. The prosecutor, Bryce, stood to object. "This footage is inconclusive," he argued. "The individual's identity cannot be definitively proven." Richard was ready. "Perhaps not," he said, "but what about this?" He displayed the metadata from the altered financial statements, highlighting Samantha's login credentials. These doctored documents were central to the prosecution's case, and they were created by someone else entirely. Bryce scrambled to regain control. He argued that Naomi could have coerced or manipulated Samantha into altering the records. But when Samantha was called to the stand to address the allegations, her composure cracked. Under Richard's cross-examination, Samantha admitted to using her credentials to access the charity's records, but she denied altering the documents. However, her denials grew weaker with each piece of evidence Richard presented. Finally, Richard delivered the coup de grace. "Ms. Samantha," he said, holding up an email she had sent to a coworker, "can you explain why you referred to these transactions as covering tracks?" "What tracks exactly were you covering?" Samantha froze, her silence louder than any admission. The tension in the courtroom was palpable, broken only by audible gasps from the audience. The judge, who had maintained a stoic demeanor throughout the trial, was visibly moved by the mounting evidence. His earlier skepticism of Naomi had given way to a growing acknowledgement of the injustices she had faced. "Mr. Bryce," the judge said sternly, "it appears that the foundation of your case is not just flawed but intentionally misleading. I'm granting the defense's motion to dismiss these charges unless you have any further evidence." Bryce stammered but could offer nothing more. With a heavy sigh, the judge turned to Naomi. "Ms. Carter," he said, "you've shown extraordinary resilience in the face of profound injustice. This court owes you an apology." As the judge declared Naomi not guilty, the courtroom erupted. Cheers, applause, and tears filled the room. Naomi sat still for a moment, overwhelmed by the weight lifting from her shoulders. Then, slowly, she stood, her head held high. But Naomi's victory wasn't just personal. It was a catalyst for change. Her case sparked conversations about systemic bias in the judicial system, particularly in cases involving race and gender. Activists and organizations rallied around her story, using it as a platform to demand reform. The evidence against Samantha prompted an internal investigation at the charity. She was ultimately fired and faced potential legal consequences for her actions. Naomi became a symbol of hope and courage. Her story was covered by local and national media, inspiring other wrongfully accused individuals to come forward and fight for their innocence. Naomi's journey transformed her from a victim to a beacon of strength. She began speaking at community events, advocating for transparency and fairness in the justice system. "I'm not just fighting for myself," she said during one event. "I'm fighting for everyone who's ever been silenced, overlooked, or underestimated. Together, we can make sure no one else has to endure what I did." As Naomi walked out of the courtroom that day, surrounded by her supporters, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but she was no longer afraid. She had faced the worst and emerged stronger, not just for herself, but for countless others who saw her as a symbol of what was possible when truth and determination prevailed. The trial of Naomi Carter didn't just end with a verdict. It set in motion a ripple of transformations that went far beyond the confines of the courtroom. For Naomi, the days that followed were a mixture of relief, reflection, and newfound responsibility. For the first time in years, Naomi could breathe freely. Yet, freedom came with its complexities. She found herself grappling with the trauma of her ordeal, haunted by the memories of unjust accusations and the weight of fighting against a system stacked against her. But Naomi was not one to dwell in the shadows of her pain. Instead, she chose to channel her experience into action. She began collaborating with local justice reform organizations, lending her voice to causes advocating for systemic change. "My story isn't unique," Naomi said during her first public address. "It's the story of countless others who never get the chance to tell it. I was lucky to have support and evidence on my side. Now, I want to make sure others have the same." She also sought therapy, recognizing the importance of healing from the emotional scars of her ordeal. The sessions helped her transform her pain into purpose, giving her the strength to face the world as an advocate for fairness and equality. Naomi's case became a rallying cry for her community. People who once whispered doubts about her innocence now came forward to apologize and express their admiration. Her determination and resilience had ignited a spark of collective introspection. Local leaders organized forums to address the biases that permeated their institutions. Police departments reviewed their procedures, and prosecutors were urged to examine cases with greater objectivity. Naomi was invited to these forums, where her insights carried the weight of lived experience. Her story also inspired a wave of grassroots initiatives aimed at combating prejudice and inequality. Community members started mentorship programs, legal aid clinics, and advocacy groups to ensure that others wouldn't have to face what Naomi did. Nationally, Naomi's case became a symbol of the urgent need for judicial reform. Activists used her story to highlight the flaws in the system, how biases could distort justice, and how individuals from marginalized communities often bore the brunt of these distortions. Judges, prosecutors, and law enforcement officials were increasingly enrolled in implicit bias training. Naomi's story was often used as a case study, showing the real-life consequences of unchecked prejudice. Some states began implementing policies that required transparency in evidence handling, stricter oversight of prosecutorial practices, and improved access to legal resources for low-income individuals. Media outlets covered Naomi's journey extensively, fostering a broader conversation about race, gender, and justice. Documentaries and opinion pieces explored the systemic challenges exposed by her trial. Judge Thompson, who presided over Naomi's case, found himself reflecting deeply on his role in perpetuating systemic bias. Though he had ultimately ruled in Naomi's favor, he couldn't ignore the skepticism with which he had initially approached her case. In an interview months after the trial, he admitted, "Naomi Carter's case forced me to confront my own biases. I realized that the scales of justice are not always balanced, and as a judge, I have a responsibility to question the structures that tip them unfairly. Judge Thompson became an advocate for judicial reform, working to create a more equitable system. His transformation was a testament to the power of evidence and the courage of individuals like Naomi who dared to challenge the status quo. As the months turned into years, Naomi's influence only grew. She authored a memoir titled Against All Odds, which became a bestseller and a source of inspiration for many. In it, she chronicled her journey, offering not just a critique of the system, but also a message of hope and resilience. She also founded the Carter Justice Initiative, a nonprofit dedicated to providing legal aid to marginalized individuals and advocating for policy changes at the local and national levels. Naomi's story resonated with people across the globe, proving that one person's courage could spark meaningful change. In her final chapter, Naomi often reflected on what her journey had taught her. "The truth is powerful," she would say. "It can be silenced, twisted, or buried, but it never disappears. When we stand for the truth, we stand for something far greater than ourselves." Naomi's story became a symbol of what was possible when resilience met opportunity and when individuals refused to let injustice have the final word. As her story reached its audience, it left them with a powerful message: that change is possible, justice is worth fighting for, and the human spirit is unbreakable when fueled by truth and courage.